Hello and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. I gotta be objective here. Heavy metal bands of the 1980s and 70s are objectively awesome, especially if they come from here in the United Kingdom. We've got Iron Maiden, Saxon, and of course, the band we're talking about today, Motorhead. Formed out of one of the former members of Hawkwind, going by the alias of Lemmy, the late great one himself, Motorhead has been seen as one of the pioneers of the new wave of British heavy metal from the later 70s and into the early 80s onwards, and in some ways helped kind of pave way for other great English metal bands to come, like the aforementioned Saxon and Iron Maiden among others. However, the members of Motorhead themselves have admitted they have more in common with punk bands of their era as well. But regardless though, they're still embraced by both fans of punk and metal, and people who are fans of both, like myself. And even with the very tragic passing of Lemmy himself about half a decade ago, the legacy still lives on in more ways than once, even if the band himself had to disband after his unfortunate passing. People still remember their songs, people still remember their albums, and one of those had, of course, recently turned 35 years old today. And that album simply goes by the title of Orgasmatron. And going by the cover, it's what you expect from a Motorhead album, or just any heavy metal album in general of the 80s. It depicts who is presumably the mascot of Motorhead, Snaggletooth, the war pig, in the form of a friggin' train on speed. The best way to describe it is if Tom of the Tank Engine met Bat Out of Hell by Meatloaf or something. It is that, just gorgeously painted and just kind of captures the speed and intensity of the kind of music genres that Motorhead attempt to capture. Props to the original artists to this, as well as those behind many of Motorhead's, if not all of Motorhead's album covers, because they are just that, for lack of a better term, they are heavy and absolutely metal, if you pardon the pun, of course. And does the music actually hold up and live up to a cover this awesome? Well, let's dig into the actual musical content itself and listen for ourselves. Beginning the album, we have Death Forever. And assuming you don't actually end up deaf forever from listening to this at high enough levels of volume, more so than it is loud enough already, this is a whopper of a start to this album. Starting off already with the thrashing guitars of Wazelle and Wizzo, this goes to show this is off to a start of what the kind of music you'd expect from Motorhead themselves. And Lemmy's distinct vocals really kick off here, singing about battlefields and kind of how stone-faced dogs and kind of swords and shields battling in their very chaotic field. The music and lyrics are an embodiment of pure concentrated chaos, and I love that. I love that. The charisma that you could just hear and feel from not just the music, but from the vocals of Lemmy himself. They're so distinct and familiar that if you hear the vocals, you would tell it's Lemmy and no other person. And the guitar bits in the middle are just merely the start of what kind of music is to come from this album. And the lyrics themselves seem to be just kind of descriptions of what one may associate with wars, battles, and conflicts and all that, like skulls and bones, the beating of drums, swords and shields in hands. Structurally, it kind of reminds me a bit of 21st Century Man by King Crimson, though much heavier, much faster, and much shorter. And just like 21st Century Skills Motorhead, it delivers and gets across its imagery very clearly and very thematically, almost theatrically even. And when Lemmy sings that line of "Death forever to the battle's din," you just feel like you want to go out and you want to fight some baddies or whatever. You want to pull out a sword and go He-Man on these people or something. If you do have a sword, I don't know. And however, in the end, if you win or lose, you ought to choose. And in the end, all men are equal when the memories fades. And I'm hoping women too, and non-binary people. But overall, much like Ace of Spades, this is one of those fantastic starters to such a heavy metal album, and a good taster of what's to come for the rest of the album. Next is Nothing Up My Sleeve, another one of Motorhead's continuous familiar kind of music. The classic speeding, thrashing kind of metal song. And the lyrics themselves seem to be about Lemmy kind of being a volunteer to this woman who's a stage musician, like having these magic tricks, like soaring in half and playing magic cards and all that. Almost like a kind of a metaphor for either gambling or maybe even having sexual intercourse with the woman. And how eventually she kind of made him disappear, and she kind of lacks the spell to bring him back, kind of probably representing how he kind of left her and she can't find him, and she possibly a kind of a broke up thing, or maybe it was just like a one night stand or something. Just like the previous song, this too has another thrashing guitar solo, and I love me a good guitar solo, and this one's no exception. This one has a bit of a more of a chunkiness to the recording of its guitar. Even the solo itself has a bit of an echoey sound to it, almost a bit it was reverberated in like post recording or something. But I still love that. I still love me some echoey reverberations. It gives off the kind of an almost atmosphere to it, and even in a heavy metal song like this, I do love that. Then we have Aint My Crime. To call this a breakup song would be a bit of an understatement. To be more accurate, this is more of a breakup and I don't care and I'm moving on with my life kind of song. Lemmy here seems to sing about how this person has kind of deceived him and kind of lied to him, and in a way kind of broke his heart, and none of that was ever his fault, and therefore not his crime. These kind of rebellious and almost anti-romantic lyrics are almost the kind of lyrics that would play and sing in my head if I ever had to deal with internet trolls online or whatnot. Lemmy seems to go on about how he's been low life and bred, and this implying that this other person was someone of higher class or more benefits in life than he has, and he had it more worse than this person he's singing about. And he even goes far to say you might as well just watch him flip the bird. And I don't know if that's almost as bad as actually showing an actual flipping of the bird, but just saying or rather singing that you might as well flip the bird is probably more of the safer alternative. And overall is another example of Lemmy's kind of almost rebellious attitude translating well into the lyrics, as well as the thrashing sped nature of the metal track. And I just can't help but still enjoy that. Next up is the simply titled song Claw. Assuming it's not about Dr. Claw from the Inspector Gadget series, this song in here, Lemmy seems to sing about how this person is very overconfident and thinking he'll achieve anything, but he soon learns to never underestimate the power of the claw. Whatever this claw actually is or represents is kind of open to interpretation. It might be the power of someone's fist, a symbol of masculinity, the overwhelming power of the forces that go against him, or, as Lemmy had kind of says in his classic cheeky tone by the very end of the song, I know what my claw is for. It probably means something else. I probably prefer not to say so, on the hopes of not being demonetized. But anyways, this is another good speedy track with those beginning opening drums and that streaming guitar riffs that kind of sound like AC/DC if they were on speed more so than they probably already were. And the culminating climax of the song with how Lemmy's voice just kind of builds higher and higher in octaves and pitch, along with the screeching guitars that kind of follow in like a call and response kind of thing. It is all around, dare even say, hyperactive, and like I said, Lemmy still has this cheekiness to his tone, especially with that closing out line after all the instruments just kind of stop, and it's both intimidating but also kind of funny and kind of fun to listen to, and that's kind of what Motorhead are. They're or were they're both intense and both very fun, and that's kind of like what heavy metal can be. That's what the best can be. Side A ends with Mean Machine. This one seems to be more of a cautionary tale about the dangers and kind of the shady effects of several industries overall, referring to them as, well, the Mean Machine, and how it refers to like the dangers of war, judging by the Black Bomber set line, or kind of like just the dangers of fame and celebrity overall, like how they refer to the big scene, the movie queens, the bright lights in the big cities, and how it seems all ideal. It all seems like a big wild dream to go to and try to catch and fulfill. But when you actually try to get to it, you find out it's not as easy and a lot more difficult than one may anticipate, and how inevitably our identities can either be ripped apart or kind of shaped and molded into this hive mind, like herd-like collective. In a way, it kind of reminds me a bit of Californication by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, of how that kind of deconstructs the ideal views of California and the whole Hollywood scene. And aside from that, though, the music itself is still classic Motorhead style. It still has the thrash guitars and those quick, fast-paced drum percussion beats. And soon enough, after all, Lemmy speaks about the cautions of the Mean Machine. It eventually all comes to a clashing end, and a very worthy end too, because after listening to side A, after hearing so much fast-paced tracks, you'd feel like you need to slow down and take a rest or something before you move on to the side B. And boy, does it feel like you've earned it. It is a good song to go out on the first side of the album. Side B begins with Built for Speed, and boy does that name fit the song, the album, if not the whole band overall. This band was built for speed, and this song alone demonstrates that. it seems to go into a bit into how well and fun the life of a rock star could or can be, from Lemmy's point of view at least. How he was born for the rock and roll, he was born with the hammer down, he was built for speed, which is sort of a double entendre, referencing both the particular drug that he'd often liked to take. Again, I don't endorse drugs of any kind. And it also fits the style of music that Motorhead often labeled as being speed metal and thrash metal and all that, or at least kind of pioneering those kind of styles of music. And as always, the guitars are still heavy and still very good. The percussion is still clean as crystal, but not the kind of crystal you may or may not be thinking of. And Lemmy you just feel like he's having fun with the songs he writes. It's another classic song that I think should have been another single off this album, and and although Death Forever was a good song in itself, it was the only single off this album, which is still a bit of a shame because Motorhead are still very good, and all their songs do have potential to be big singles, if not very memorable songs. So something like this is kind of, for lack of a better word, underrated. Riding with the Driver also kind of continues this theme, this atmosphere of like hardcore speed metal. And like with Death Forever, its lyrics kind of have these vague yet very clear descriptions of like hardcore imagery that one would associate with heavy metal, like iron Vulcans and like dragons breathing and kind of like this thunder chief and riding through like hell and all that. And there's also a bit of interesting trivia behind this particular song. The album Orgasmatron was originally meant to be titled Riding with a Driver, thus this was to be the title track. And that funny little story that kind of connects to the actual album cover itself right here. The artist in question, Joe Petagno, I apologize if I butchered the artist's name, was tasked to do the cover for the album, and during that time it was planned under the title of Riding with a Driver. So Lemmy kind of suggested him do like an image of a train or something, kind of go along with the theme of riding with a driver, and presumably this would have been the Thunder Chief of the actual lyrics, or due to the title change it could be called the Orgasmatron, I don't know. But regardless, in kind of the last minute they changed the title to another song title, Orgasmatron, and so it was kind of too late to start from scratch and do a new cover altogether, so they just kind of stuck with this, and there we are. But regardless, it still kind of fits the album overall, and the song itself is still another good song, and it still has a lot of hardcore imagery to its lyrical content. Then we have the penultimate song, Dr. Rock. By the way, that's probably like the second time in a row I looked at a song called Doctor in the title, plus beginning with R.O. in the name. First Dr. Roberts from the Beatles' Revolver album, and now Dr. Rock from Motorhead. But regardless though, this one actually kind of feels like a song about a metaphorical doctor for someone who like offers drugs. The best way to describe it is the heavy metal equivalent of the Dr. Beat song. Someone who either offers drugs or just kind of offers you listen to music as a cure for whatever disease or illness you're suffering from. And whether which interpretation is more valid is still open to interpretation, but regardless, it's still this one's a very hoppy, very bouncy, guitarish drum beat to it, and Lemmy still has that kind of almost snarky kind of sense of humor to him, almost having a bit of a shout out to Dr. Spock even, and kind of and how if you don't do his orders right, he may end up making you even more ill than necessary, and it's and of course it still has his fun snarky attitude, and he still also has almost chill kind of feeling to his tone as well. However, I take it back. When I say he's chilled, I mean he has not a whole lot of patience, as demonstrated in some of the later lyrics. How he'll probably go on to the next patient, and he doesn't like to wait. He wants to be paid for his effort or what he does, and that while he may be a doctor, he ain't a doctor of philosophy. He's a doctor of rock and roll. And so our album ends with the title track, Orgasmatron. While Dr. Rock kind of began right away without any need for any bollocks, just jumping straight to the point with both the music and the vocals, Orgasmatron kind of takes its time gradually, building up with those distorted, almost mechanical sounding guitars, and then eventually leading into the vocals just long enough for a proper and yet still very quick-paced build-up, which is fantastic. And out of all the songs from this album, the title track, Orgasmatron, is probably the most deepest in terms of its lyrics. And in it, Lemmy kind of deals with the various subjects that he kind of finds an issue with, and kind of personifies this kind of entity as the ideologue manifestation of all the problems with them, being religion, politics, and war. The first verses kind of deal with, well, religions, and how people will kind of flock to have faith and kind of be easily manipulated by some people in organized religions just for their own selfish gains, under the guise of there being a reward from a higher source, but when really it'll probably be all for nothing. And how in the second verse it deals with politics, describing himself as kind of a ruler, an emperor of ice and vice, and just kind of how they'll slaughter and downfall as they'll gain. And the third and last verse deals with war, kind of describing a world of martyrs, how people believe they'll be led to freedom and liberty, but in a way, all that death and slaughter may possibly be for nothing, if not for the gains of those higher up. In fact, the end of each verse kind of flat out addresses it. The first kind of says, "My name's called religion, sadistic and sacred, and I am the politician. I bribe your fate and decide your fate, and I bribe your hate. And I am Mars, the god of war, and I'll cut you down." So Lemmy does make that as clear as possible without being too shallow or being too transparent about it. He still kind of makes it ambiguous enough to not just point the finger at one person or this person or a particular individual, but a collective overall. He kind of stands up to this whole, as I said before, he kind of stands up to the whole hive mind, the whole collectivism mindset, and how easily we are easily swayed to compromise our own individual identities in the belief that we could achieve goodness and a worthy reward, and how we could easily be turned on and easily betrayed. So, and the music itself still kind of has that kind of almost proggy feeling to it. While the last song of side A, which that was the shortest song and about 3 seconds away from being 3 minutes, This song is the longest song of this album, at about 5 minutes and 27 seconds, and boy does it go out with a clattering bang. And overall, Orgasmatron by Motorhead is is probably one of the more underrated albums in my opinion. I mean, it's not entirely bashed or criticized, but it seems to be the beginning of a declining popularity for the band, especially after big hits like Ace of Spades. Um, and but still, just because an album doesn't make as much money or isn't as popular as another, doesn't automatically make it bad. Sometimes the problem can be sometimes playing it safe, which at first hearing one may get out of an album like this. It may sound too derivative and too similar to previous albums, but it's still kind of the style. Like with AC/DC, they don't need to abruptly and significantly change everything entirely to their fundamental cores. They still kind of change it up and pace it around a bit, just so people can keep up and hear different songs and come to different conclusions. So I say if you're a casual fan of Motorhead or heavy metal or death metal, speed metal, thrash metal overall, I say give this album a chance. And if this is up your alley, you may like the Motorhead band overall. Believe me, I say, if you listen to an album like this or any album by Motorhead, you will indeed be on one hell of a ride with the driver. Next time, well, I'm still trying to figure out what's next. Or rather, who's next?